I could hear the screaming from half a mile away. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I raced down the gravel driveway, my heart pounding like a drum. The sound was getting louder, more desperate, more terrified. As I rounded the corner past the old oak tree, I saw it. Corinne Morrison, the HOA president who had made my life hell for months, was pressed against the barn wall. Her designer clothes were torn and dirty. Her perfectly styled hair was a mess. And standing between her and the only exit was Thunder, my 2,000-pound bull, snorting and pawing the ground. This was the woman who had spent months trying to destroy my farm, who had filed false complaints, harassed me with fake inspections, and threatened to take my property. Now she was trapped on my land, begging for help from the very person she had tried to ruin. But let me start from the beginning. This is how one woman's greed led to the most satisfying moment of natural justice I have ever witnessed. 3 years ago, I made the best decision of my life. I left the suburbs behind and bought 40 acres of rolling farmland in the countryside. After 20 years of dealing with HOA rules about grass height, fence colors, and approved mailbox designs, I was finally free. My mornings started with the sound of roosters crowing and the gentle lowing of cattle in the distance. I would walk out to the barn as the sun painted the sky pink and orange, breathing in the sweet smell of hay and fresh morning air. No more looking over my shoulder, wondering if some neighbor was measuring my hedge height or reporting my car for being parked 2 inches too far from the curb. The property was perfect. A weathered red barn stood in the center, surrounded by green pastures that stretched to the horizon. The farmhouse was old but solid, with a wraparound porch where I could sit and watch the sunset without anyone telling me my porch swing was not the approved color. But the real king of my little kingdom was Thunder. He was a massive black Angus bull who had come with the property. The previous owner, an elderly farmer named George, had warned me about him. "Thunder is gentle as a lamb most of the time," George had said, scratching his gray beard. "But he does not like strangers on his land. He has chased off more than one trespasser over the years." I soon learned that Thunder was both protector and friend. He would follow me around the pasture like a giant dog, his massive head nudging my shoulder when he wanted attention. But when strangers approached, his demeanor changed completely. His head would lower, his eyes would narrow, and he would position himself between the intruder and whatever he was protecting. The farm sat on the edge of a growing suburban development. When I first moved in, there were only a few houses visible through the trees. But each month, more construction crews appeared. More bulldozers, more perfectly manicured lawns creeping closer to my property line. I had drawn clear boundaries. Posted signs marked my property lines. A sturdy fence separated my land from the development. I thought that would be enough to keep two different worlds apart. Most of my new neighbors were friendly enough. They would wave when they drove past, and some even stopped to admire Thunder from a safe distance. But I noticed something that made me uneasy. Occasionally, I would see cars driving slowly past my property. Well-dressed people with clipboards, taking photos and making notes. They would stop at my gate, point at my barn, and have intense conversations. I told myself it was nothing, just curious neighbors, but deep down I knew better. I had seen that look before. It was the same look I had seen in my old HOA meetings. The look of people who believed they knew better than everyone else. People who thought they had the right to control what others did with their own property. Those were peaceful days, though. I would spend hours working in the fields, fixing fences, and caring for my animals. Thunder would graze nearby, always watching, always protecting. I had found my sanctuary and I was determined to keep it. The first attack came on a Tuesday morning in early June. I was repairing a section of fence when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. I looked up to see a woman in a crisp white blazer and black slacks walking toward me. She carried a leather portfolio and wore the kind of confident smile that immediately put me on guard. "Good morning," she called out in a voice that sounded friendly but felt anything but. "I am Corinne Morrison, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. I need to speak with you about some concerns we have regarding your property." I set down my hammer and walked over to meet her. Two other people had gotten out of her car. A thin man in a polo shirt was taking photos of my barn with his phone. A woman with a tablet was typing notes furiously. "I am sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "but your HOA has no authority over my property. This is agricultural land and it was here long before your development." Corinne's smile never wavered, but something cold flashed in her eyes. "Well, that is where you are wrong. This property may be outside our official boundaries, but it still affects our community standards. Your barn is visible from several homes in our neighborhood, and frankly, it is bringing down property values." I felt my blood pressure rising. "Ma'am, I own this land. I have every right to have a barn on my own property." "We have received numerous complaints," Corinne continued, pulling out a folder from her portfolio. "Noise violations from your animals, odor complaints, safety concerns about having large livestock so close to residential areas. We need you to remove these structures and relocate your animals immediately." The audacity of her demand left me speechless for a moment. I watched as her assistants continued documenting my property, treating my farm like it was some kind of crime scene. "Let me be very clear," I said, my voice getting firmer. "You have no legal authority here. This is private property. I have all the proper permits and licenses. My animals are healthy and well cared for, and I have every right to farm my own land." Corinne's fake smile finally cracked. "Sir, I am trying to work with you here, but if you refuse to cooperate, we will have to pursue other options. We have connections with the county, the state agriculture department, and environmental agencies. We can make this very difficult for you." The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. I looked at Thunder, who had wandered closer to the fence. He was watching Corinne with the same suspicious look I had seen him give to coyotes. "I suggest you leave my property now," I said quietly, "and do not come back without a warrant or proper legal authority." Corinne snapped her portfolio shut. "Fine, but this is not over. We will be back with proper documentation, and when we return, you will either comply with our reasonable requests or you will face the consequences." She turned on her heel and marched back to her car, her assistant scrambling to follow. As they drove away, I stood in my driveway, suddenly feeling like my peaceful sanctuary was under siege. That evening, I spent hours researching property law on the internet. I read about HOA overreach, property rights, and trespassing laws. Everything I found confirmed what I already knew. Corinne Morrison and her HOA had absolutely no legal authority over my land. But I also knew that being right and being left alone were two different things. I had seen what HOAs could do to people who did not fight back. They could file endless complaints, tie you up in legal battles, and make your life miserable through sheer persistence. I made a decision that night. I would not back down. I would not let them bully me off my own land. If Corinne Morrison wanted a fight, she would get one. But she would quickly learn that farm life had taught me to be tougher than any suburban bureaucrat. Corinne Morrison proved to be a woman of her word. Over the next 2 months, she launched a campaign of harassment that would have impressed a military strategist. She returned to my property 3 more times, each time with different complaints and new demands. The first return visit came just a week later. This time, she brought a man in a county inspector's uniform. I watched from my kitchen window as they walked along my fence line, the inspector taking notes while Karen pointed at various parts of my property. When they knocked on my door, the inspector looked embarrassed. "Sir, I am required to investigate complaints about agricultural operations. I have received reports about noise violations, improper animal housing, and potential environmental hazards." I spent the next hour walking the inspector around my property, showing him my permits, my animal care records, and my environmental compliance documentation. He checked everything twice, then shook his head. "Mr. Morrison," he said to Karen, "this operation is completely compliant with all county regulations. The animals are healthy, the facilities are clean, and all permits are current. I cannot find any violations." Karen's face turned red. "Well, what about the noise, the smell, the visual impact on our community?" The inspector shrugged. "Ma'am, this is agricultural zoning. Farms are supposed to have animals. They are supposed to smell like farms, and they are supposed to look like farms. There is nothing I can do about that." But Karen was just getting started. Over the following weeks, she parked at my property line almost daily, always with a different excuse. Sometimes she was monitoring noise levels. Other times she was documenting environmental concerns. She took photos of everything: my barn, my animals, my equipment, even my mailbox. The parade of inspectors that followed was exhausting. The Environmental Protection Agency sent someone to check for water contamination. The Agriculture Department sent someone to verify my livestock permits. The zoning office sent someone to confirm my land use compliance. Every single inspector reached the same conclusion: my farm was operating legally and properly. But each visit took hours of my time, and each false complaint went into some file that Karen could use to claim there was a pattern of problems. The breaking point came when Karen organized a neighborhood meeting to discuss the agricultural nuisance that was affecting their community. I was not invited, but word got back to me about what happened. Karen had prepared a presentation complete with photos and charts. She claimed my farm was a health hazard, an environmental threat, and a danger to children. She had counted every cow, measured every fence post, and documented every sound my animals made. "This is not about being anti-agriculture," she had told the packed meeting room. "This is about protecting our investment in this community. Our homes are worth less because of that eyesore. Our children are at risk because of those dangerous animals, and our quality of life is suffering because of the constant noise and smell." The petition she circulated that night collected over 50 signatures demanding that local authorities force me to relocate my operation. 50 people who had never set foot on my property, never spoken to me, and never bothered to learn the first thing about farming, had decided that my livelihood was inconvenient for them. The psychological pressure was intense. I began to dread hearing cars in my driveway. Every phone call might be another agency investigating another false complaint. Every day brought the possibility of another confrontation with Karen and her clipboard. But the worst part was the constant surveillance. Karen had made it clear that she was watching everything I did. She knew my schedule, my routines, and my habits. She was building a case against me, one photo and one complaint at a time. I realized that this was not just about property rights anymore. This was about power. Karen Morrison had decided that she could control anyone and anything that did not fit her vision of how the world should look. She had the time, the resources, and the determination to make my life miserable until I gave up and moved away. That night, I stood on my porch looking out at my land. Thunder was grazing peacefully in the moonlight, unaware of the bureaucratic war being fought over his home. I made a promise to myself and to him. I would not let them win. I would not let them take what I had worked so hard to build. Whatever Corinne Morrison had planned next, I would be ready for it. The final confrontation came on a hot August morning that I will never forget. I was in the barn cleaning stalls when I heard the familiar sound of Corinne's car in my driveway. But this time was different. This time, she was not alone. Through the barn door, I watched as Corinne got out of her car holding a thick folder of papers. She was dressed in a navy blue suit that looked more appropriate for a court hearing than a farm visit. Her usual confident smile was replaced by something harder, more determined. With her were the same two assistants from her first visit, plus a new face. A man in a cheap gray suit carrying a briefcase. He looked official, like someone who worked for the government or a law firm. "We need to talk," Corinne announced as I walked out to meet them. "Immediately." She opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers that looked impressive and official. "These are environmental compliance orders," she said, holding them up like a weapon. "We have documented numerous violations of state and federal environmental regulations on this property." My heart sank as I looked at the papers. They had official-looking seals and signatures, legal language that I did not fully understand, forms that demanded immediate access to my property for inspection and remediation. "Furthermore," Corinne continued, "we have initiated eminent domain proceedings to acquire this property for the public good. The county has determined that this land would be better served as a community park and environmental preserve." The man in the gray suit stepped forward. "Sir, I am required to inform you that you have 24 hours to allow our environmental team full access to this property. Any interference with this investigation will result in criminal charges." I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. These papers looked real. These people sounded like they knew what they were talking about. For a moment, I almost believed them. "I need to see some identification," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. The man in the gray suit looked uncomfortable. "Sir, that is not necessary. These documents speak for themselves." Something in his tone made me suspicious. Real government officials were used to showing identification. They expected questions about their authority. This man seemed nervous about basic procedural requests. "I am sorry, but I need to see official identification from everyone here," I said, more firmly this time. "And I need to make some phone calls before I allow any inspection." Corinne's mask of official authority slipped for just a moment. I saw a flash of panic in her eyes before she regained her composure. "You are making a serious mistake," she said. "Interfering with an environmental investigation is a federal crime. The consequences will be severe." "Then you should have no problem waiting while I verify your authority," I replied. The next hour was the longest of my life. I called the county environmental office, the state agriculture department, and even the FBI field office. Every single agency told me the same thing. They had no record of any investigation, no record of any compliance orders, no record of any eminent domain proceedings. The documents Corinne had shown me were elaborate fakes. When I walked back outside, Corinne was packing by her car while her assistant stood around looking uncomfortable. The man in the gray suit had disappeared entirely. "Where did your environmental investigator go?" I asked. Corinne's face turned bright red. "He had another appointment, but that does not change anything. These orders are still valid." "No, they are not," I said, pulling out my phone. "I just spoke to every agency you claim to represent. None of them have any record of this supposed investigation. These documents are forgeries." For the first time in our months of confrontation, Karen looked genuinely afraid. She realized that she had crossed a line from harassment into criminal fraud. "You are making a terrible mistake," she said, but her voice had lost its confident authority. "If you do not allow this inspection, the consequences will be severe. We will return with sheriff's deputies. We will return with federal agents. We will return with whatever authority is necessary to gain access to this property." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Ms. Morrison, you are trespassing on my property with forged documents. You are impersonating government officials, and you are threatening me with law enforcement action that you have no authority to take. I am asking you to leave immediately." Karen snatched the papers from my hands and stormed back to her car. "This is not over," she shouted as she got in. "One way or another, we will get access to this property, and when we do, you will regret not cooperating." As they drove away, I stood in my driveway holding my phone, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and adrenaline. Karen Morrison had just committed multiple felonies on my property. She had forged government documents, impersonated officials, and made criminal threats. But I also knew that she was not bluffing about returning. She had already shown that she was willing to break the law to get what she wanted. The question was not whether she would come back, but when, and what she would do next. That evening, I called a lawyer and explained everything that had happened. He confirmed what I suspected. Karen had committed serious crimes, and I had grounds for a restraining order and criminal charges. But he also warned me about something else. "People like this do not give up easily," he said. "Be very careful, document everything, and consider installing security cameras. If she is willing to forge federal documents, there is no telling what she might do next." I took his advice. That night, I installed cameras around my property and put up additional "no trespassing" signs. I also called the sheriff's office and filed a report about the forged documents and threats. But as I lay in bed that night, I could not shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Karen Morrison had declared war on me, and I had no idea what she was capable of. The moment I had been dreading came 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon when I was supposed to be safe. I had driven into town for a county planning meeting about rural zoning protections. It was an important meeting, and I had been looking forward to speaking about the harassment I had been enduring. I should have known that Karen would somehow find out about my schedule. The security cameras I had installed captured everything. Later, when I reviewed the footage, I watched the violation of my property unfold like a carefully planned military operation. At 2:15 p.m., exactly 15 minutes after I had left for town, Karen's car appeared at my gate. She was not alone. The same 2 assistants from her previous visits were with her, plus a new person I did not recognize carrying what looked like professional photography equipment. The cameras recorded their conversation at the gate. Karen was clearly in charge, pointing at different parts of my property and giving instructions. One of her assistants tried the gate and found it locked. That did not stop them. What happened next was captured in crystal clear detail. Karen walked around to the side of the gate where the fence was lower. She hiked up her skirt, grabbed the top rail, and climbed over. Her assistants followed, one of them boosting the photographer over the fence. They were now criminally trespassing on my property. For the next hour, they conducted what could only be described as a comprehensive invasion. They photographed everything: the barn interior, my equipment, my animal feeding areas. They even went through my garbage, documenting what they found. The photographer took hundreds of pictures while Karen's assistants measured distances and took notes. They treated my property like a crime scene, documenting every detail with the thoroughness of professional investigators. But the cameras captured something else. Posted clearly on my fence, my barn, and my gates were multiple signs warning about thunder and advising visitors to stay away from the livestock areas. The signs were not subtle. They featured pictures of bulls and clear warnings about dangerous animals. Karen and her team ignored every single warning. At 3:45 p.m., Karen approached Thunder's pasture. The big bull was grazing peacefully about 50 yards away, unaware that strangers were violating his territory. Karen climbed through the fence rails and walked directly into the pasture, her photographer following behind. Thunder's reaction was immediate and dramatic. His head shot up, his ears flattened, and his massive body turned toward the intruders. Even through the security camera footage, I could see the change in his posture. This was no longer a gentle farm animal. This was a 2,000-pound territorial guardian whose domain had been invaded. Karen seemed oblivious to the danger. She continued walking through the pasture, pointing at different areas while her photographer took pictures. Thunder began moving toward them, his walk becoming a trot, then a full charge. The sound of 2,000 pounds of angry bull thundering across the pasture must have been terrifying. The photographer dropped his camera and ran. One of Karen's assistants screamed a warning. But Karen, determined to get whatever evidence she was after, kept walking until Thunder was less than 20 feet away. That was when reality hit. Karen turned around and saw Thunder bearing down on her like a freight train. Her confident swagger disappeared instantly. She ran toward the barn, her high heels slipping on the uneven ground. Thunder followed, not attacking but herding her away from his territory. The cameras captured the next 15 minutes in excruciating detail. Karen and her team were trapped between Thunder and the locked gate. Every time they tried to approach the fence, Thunder would position himself between them and their exit. He was not trying to hurt them, but he was making it clear that they were not welcome and they were not leaving until he decided they could. Karen's designer suit was dirty and torn. Her perfect hair was disheveled. Her assistants were pale and shaking. The photographer was hyperventilating behind a hay bale, but Thunder just stood there, patient and immovable, watching them like a prison guard. At 4:30 p.m., I got the call I had been expecting. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who lived closest to my property, called to tell me that she could hear screaming coming from my farm. "It sounds like someone is in trouble," she said. "Should I call the police?" I told her I was on my way home and asked her to call the sheriff's office. As I drove back from town, my mind was racing. I was angry about the trespassing, but I was also genuinely concerned about their safety. Thunder was not a killer, but he was a powerful animal who did not understand the difference between protecting his territory and endangering human life. As I turned into my driveway, I could see Karen's car parked at an odd angle near my gate. I could hear the shouting before I even got out of my truck. Female voices, high-pitched and panicked, coming from the direction of the barn. I walked around the barn and saw them. Karen Morrison, the woman who had made my life hell for months, was pressed against the barn wall looking more frightened than I had ever seen another human being look. Her two assistants were huddled nearby, and their photographer was crouched behind a wheelbarrow. And standing guard over all of them was Thunder, calm and patient, making sure they stayed exactly where they were. For a moment, I felt a surge of satisfaction. After months of harassment, false complaints, and forged documents, Corinne Morrison was finally experiencing real consequences for her actions. But I also knew that I had a responsibility to end this safely. Thunder was my animal, and these people, however much they deserved it, were in genuine danger. The scene in my barn was something I will never forget. Corinne Morrison, the woman who had spent months trying to control my life, was now completely at the mercy of my bull. Her expensive suit was torn and dirty. Her hair was disheveled. Her face was streaked with tears and dirt. "Help us," she screamed as soon as she saw me. "That animal is trying to kill us." I looked at Thunder, who was standing about 10 feet away from the barn entrance, calmly chewing grass. His posture was relaxed but alert. He was not trying to kill anyone. He was simply making sure they did not leave. "How did you get in here?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "That does not matter," Corinne shouted. "We have every right to be here. This is an official inspection. Now get that beast away from us so we can leave." I pulled out my phone and showed her the security footage I had already downloaded. "This shows you climbing over my locked gate at 2:15 p.m. You ignored multiple posted warnings about dangerous animals. You trespassed on my property and invaded my livestock areas without permission." Corinne's face went even paler. "We were conducting a legitimate environmental assessment. We have authority to access this property for public safety reasons." "No, you do not," I said calmly. "You have no authority here. You committed criminal trespass, breaking and entering, and you put yourselves in danger by ignoring clearly posted warnings." Thunder shifted his weight and took a step closer to the barn. Corinne pressed herself harder against the wall. "I am calling the police," she said, reaching for her phone. "I already did," I replied. "They should be here any minute." The irony was not lost on me. For months, Corinne had threatened to call law enforcement on me. Now she was the one who would be facing criminal charges. "Look," I said, "I am going to get Thunder back to his pasture so you can leave safely. But I want you to understand something. You are caught on camera committing multiple crimes on my property. You ignored safety warnings and put yourselves in danger. This is entirely your fault." I walked over to Thunder and patted his massive neck. "Good boy," I whispered. "You did exactly what you were supposed to do." Thunder looked at me with his big brown eyes and snorted softly. I could swear he looked proud of himself. "Come on, big guy," I said, leading him toward the pasture gate. "Let the nice criminals leave." Thunder followed me obediently, but he kept looking back at Corinne and her team. He was still in protection mode, making sure they did not try anything else. As soon as Thunder was safely in his pasture, Corinne and her assistants ran toward the gate. But before they could reach their car, 2 sheriff's deputies pulled into my driveway. Someone reported screaming and possible danger, one of the deputies said as he got out of his patrol car. "Yes, officer," I said. "These people trespassed on my property and ignored posted warnings about dangerous animals. They have been trapped in my barn for the past hour." The deputy looked at Corinne, who was still dirty and disheveled. "Ma'am, can you explain what happened here?" Corinne immediately went into attack mode. "This man has dangerous animals on his property. We were conducting a legitimate inspection when we were attacked by his bull. He should be arrested for reckless endangerment." The deputy looked skeptical. "Ma'am, do you have documentation showing you had permission to be on this property?" "We do not need permission," Corinne snapped. "We are conducting official business." I handed the deputy my phone. "Officer, I have security footage showing them climbing over my locked gate and ignoring multiple warning signs about dangerous animals. They were trespassing. The deputy reviewed the footage, his expression growing more serious with each minute. "Ma'am, this clearly shows you and your associates unlawfully entering private property. You climbed over a locked gate and ignored posted warnings. This is criminal trespass." Corinne's face turned red. "We were conducting an environmental assessment. We have every right to inspect this property for public safety violations." "Do you have any documentation showing you work for a government agency?" the deputy asked. Corinne hesitated. "We represent the Willow Creek Homeowners Association." "Ma'am, HOAs have no authority to enter private property without permission, and this property is not even within your HOA boundaries." The second deputy had been walking around the property, examining the posted signs and the evidence of trespassing. "There are warning signs everywhere," he reported. "Multiple signs about dangerous animals, no trespassing warnings, and clear property boundaries." Corinne realized she was in serious trouble. "Officer, we were just trying to protect our community. This property is a nuisance and a danger to everyone." "Ma'am, you are under arrest for criminal trespass and breaking and entering," the first deputy said, reaching for his handcuffs. "Wait," Corinne pleaded. "This is all a misunderstanding. We can work this out." But it was too late. The deputies arrested all three trespassers and charged them with multiple crimes. The photographer was charged with additional counts for the equipment he had damaged while fleeing from Thunder. As they loaded Corinne into the patrol car, she looked at me with pure hatred. "This is not over," she said. "I will make sure you pay for this." I looked at Thunder, who was peacefully grazing in his pasture, completely unaware that he had just delivered more justice than months of legal proceedings could have achieved. "Actually," I said to Corinne, "I think it is over. You just committed multiple felonies on camera. You will be lucky if you avoid prison time." The deputies drove away with their prisoners, leaving me alone on my property for the first time in months. The silence was beautiful. No more threats, no more harassment, no more Corinne Morrison. Thunder walked over to the fence and looked at me with what I could swear was satisfaction. I scratched his head and smiled. "You did good, boy," I said. "You did real good." The aftermath of the trespassing incident was swift and satisfying. Corinne Morrison and her two assistants were charged with criminal trespass, breaking and entering, and reckless endangerment. The photographer faced additional charges for property damage. The local newspaper picked up the story, and it spread through social media like wildfire. The headline read, "HOA President Arrested After Bull Traps Trespassers on Local Farm." The security footage became a viral sensation, with millions of views and thousands of comments supporting my right to protect my property. Corinne's legal troubles were just beginning. The district attorney decided to prosecute the case aggressively, viewing it as a clear example of HOA overreach and criminal harassment. The forged documents from her previous visit added federal charges to her growing list of legal problems. But the real justice came from an unexpected source. The Willow Creek Homeowners Association held an emergency meeting 3 days after the arrest. The board members, embarrassed by the negative publicity and concerned about potential lawsuits, voted unanimously to remove Corinne from her position as president. The new HOA leadership reached out to me within a week. The new president, a retired teacher named Margaret Chen, came to my property with a formal apology and a promise that the harassment would end. "What Corinne did was wrong," she said as we sat on my porch, watching Thunder graze peacefully in his pasture. She acted without board approval and violated every principle of good neighbor relations. On behalf of the entire association, I apologize. Margaret also brought news that made me smile. The HOA had voted to establish a good neighbor policy that specifically prohibited members from interfering with agricultural operations outside their jurisdiction. They had also voted to contribute to a fund for rural property protection advocacy. "We want to be good neighbors," Margaret said. "We moved to this area because we love the rural character. We should be supporting farmers like you, not trying to drive them away." The legal resolution took several months, but it was worth the wait. Karen was sentenced to 6 months in county jail, 2 years of probation, and 200 hours of community service. She was also required to pay restitution for my legal fees and the cost of additional security measures. The photographer and assistants received lighter sentences, but were banned from my property permanently. The restraining order I obtained prevents any of them from coming within 500 feet of my land. But the best part was Thunder's transformation into a local legend. The security footage of him calmly herding the trespassers into the barn became a symbol of rural justice. People started calling him Thunder the Guardian and the Bull who saved the farm. Visitors began stopping by just to meet Thunder and hear the story. I started offering farm tour, partly to educate people about agriculture and partly to show off my famous bull. Thunder seemed to enjoy the attention, posing for photos and accepting treats from admiring visitors. The incident also sparked a broader conversation about HOA overreach and property rights. I was invited to speak at several rural advocacy meetings, sharing my story and encouraging other landowners to stand up for their rights. 6 months later, I received an unexpected visitor. A young couple from the city came to my gate, looking nervous but determined. "We heard about what happened here," the woman said. "We are thinking about buying rural property to start a small farm. Can you give us some advice?" I spent the afternoon showing them around, explaining the challenges and rewards of farm life. As they left, the man shook my hand and said something that made me proud. "Thank you for not backing down," he said. "People like you make it possible for people like us to follow our dreams." That evening I stood on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Thunder was grazing nearby, content and peaceful. The harassment was over. The threats were gone. My sanctuary was secure. I thought about the months of stress and conflict, the legal battles and sleepless nights. It had been a difficult fight, but it was worth it. Sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when they wear suits and carry clipboards. Rural life is not for everyone. It requires hard work, patience, and the courage to defend what you believe in. But for those who choose this path, the rewards are immeasurable. Freedom, independence, and the satisfaction of knowing that you have created something meaningful with your own hands. As I walked inside that night, I could hear Thunder snorting softly in his pasture, still standing guard over our little piece of paradise. Some battles are worth fighting, and some victories are worth celebrating. Karen Morrison learned that lesson the hard way, and Thunder made sure she would never forget it.